Elly didn't fall in her face and die.
A foul play murder of Elly in some form.
So it takes nothing to take somebody out and completely deal with it.
I need support from the Australian government. Here's the last photo taken of Elly.
What would you do if you found out your daughter had just been killed in another country, thousands of miles away?
Oh, it's devastating, Tom. It's devastating, you know. It's just, she's such a treasure and she loved life so much, and it's just something that's just should never happen.
Normal life ended for the Warren family after 20-year-old Elly left for a trip to Mozambique and never came back. She was a kind, energetic, and adventurous girl who was dedicating all her energy to protecting wildlife and saving the planet. Yet somehow her reward for all of this was a brutal murder. And to make things worse, it seems like the Mozambique Police are working hard to cover it up. Who are they protecting? What is going on? Ellie Warren's case is far from over. Her family didn't get the closure they need, and justice has not been brought to her. So let's explore all the crazy twists and turns in the story of the girl who was killed by a famous crime lord. Ellie Warren was born in 1996 in Mozambique, a pretty beach suburb in Melbourne, Australia. She grew up with her parents Nicole and Paul and her younger sister Christy. At some point in her life, Nicole and Paul split up, but this wasn't the end of their friendship. Ellie remained close with both of her parents, but it was Paul who was Ellie's best friend.
Hey Christy, it's actually a really nice day today. You should have come out. It's like perfect.
If you had to describe Ellie with an expression, it would be joie de vivre, the joy of life.
She was full of life. She was always happy, always on the go. There was never enough hours in the day to get to get all the things done that she wanted. She'd get up in the morning and she would cram as much as she possibly could into her day.
This often involved sports, climbing trees, hiking, and meeting people and animals around the globe. By the time she graduated high school, Ellie knew what her life goal was: to save the planet and help environmentalists with the conservation projects. And the place she loved most was Africa.
Ellie was a girl that really, you know, she knew what she wanted to do, and there's no way in the world that I could have stopped her. Even Nicole says, her mother says the same thing. There's no way possible. She had her dreams and she loved the African people and the culture there.
In fact, in 2016, Ellie had 3 different jobs just to be able to afford a marine biology program in Tofo, Mozambique.
She went with an underwater diving group, Underwater Africa, and it was a volunteering group with scientists over in Tofo. It was a course for 6 weeks, and Tofo is a magnificent place for marine life. There's whales, manta rays, and whale sharks, and it's got everything at the Madagascar Strait there.
So, in October 2016, Ellie packed her bags, kissed her family goodbye, and got on a plane to Mozambique. Ellie stayed in a bungalow that was part of a popular diving resort called Casabari on Tofo Beach. When she wasn't at the resort, she dived, met people, and took boats out to the reefs together with marine biologists. Mozambique was going to be her preparatory trip before enrolling at James Cook University to study marine biology. But she would never get to study marine biology. In fact, Ellie never made it home from Tofo. Her lifeless body would soon be found face down next to a dirty toilet block. It was early November 2016. Ellie had almost completed her 6-week program in Tofo. Whenever she would talk to her parents on the phone, she would always say how the trip was her dream come true.
She was loving it. Yeah, she was loving it. And when she first saw her first whale shark, that sort of made it all worthwhile for her.
On Tuesday, November 8th, Ellie checked in at the Uani Pari Yango for her last night in Mozambique. There, she met with her friends and they went out to celebrate the end of the program. It had been amazing. Ellie got to work with people she considered role models and hung out with every possible animal in the area. The very next day, Ellie was supposed to fly back to Australia to see her family again. They missed her dearly. 6 weeks was a long time to be apart. But Ellie never made it home. Nicole, Paul, and everyone who loved Ellie was frantic. She had always been in touch with them. Why wasn't she picking up the phone? Then finally a call came in, but it wasn't from Ellie.
I got a phone call from my other daughter, Christy, and she was hysterical over the phone. And then she settled down and she actually said, Ellie's been murdered overseas. And, oh, God. I tell you, my heart dropped. It's just a phone call that no parents would ever, it's just, I can't comprehend it.
Imagine learning this news over the phone, knowing that you weren't there with her during her last moments, and not knowing exactly what happened. Well, this was the question Ellie's family needed immediate answers to. What had happened? Who'd killed Elly, and why? But this is where it gets complicated and very frustrating. The more time passed, the more conflicted the information would get. Mozambique authorities didn't seem to be interested in solving Ellie's case.
Well, initially we were told that Elly had been murdered and that potentially there'd been assault as well. So again, from a mother's point of view, very difficult to accept, not knowing who, how, or why.
When the Mozambique police refused to give any relevant information about Ellie's death, the Warren family said, okay, let the Australian police investigate. That's when Mozambique said no. Apparently, Ellie's death could only be investigated by the local police, and the Australian authorities were not welcome. This was the first of many dubious actions the Mozambique police did in this case. There was also this. Forensic analysis found 0 drugs in Ellie's system after her death. Nevertheless, when the police report came out, it said Elly had died of an overdose. Why? Paul had waited 6 months to get the official report, hoping that the local authorities were handling things. When it came out, he was infuriated.
They can't put their police report out, which was only a page and a half, and the first one came out with an overdose.
But then you've got toxicology reports saying there's no drugs in the system.
No, complete toxicology reports, hair sample, liver sample from Melbourne, from South Africa, no drugs whatsoever.
Then 4 days later, the police released a second report. This one copy-pasted the autopsy report that said Ellie's death was a homicide. The cause of death? Mechanical asphyxiation and the introduction of sandy contents. That is, someone hit her and poured sand down her throat. Jeez. And what is it with the 2 completely different records released 4 days apart? The truth was actually much darker. It wasn't that the police weren't doing anything in the investigation, they were interfering with it so as to mask the homicide. There was another clue that pointed Paul and Nicole toward this conclusion. The autopsy report said Elly had beach sand in her lungs, but the location where they found her body, next to the toilet block, only had red, hard-packed earth, very different from the golden sand figured in the autopsy. Had someone moved Ellie's body there? Were the perpetrators trying to frame someone? The more questions Paul asked the Mozambique authorities, the more vague their answers got. So, about a year after his daughter's death, Paul left Melbourne and headed to Tofo. He was about to uncover some truly shocking plot twists in the story. But I must warn you, it only gets more infuriating and all the more tragic.
Well, it's at the moment, it's up in the air. It's a suspected a murder. What are the Mozambique authorities going to do about this? What are they going to do? Sweep it under the carpet and put it in the too hard basket? You know, it's just not on.
Think about all the other victims who don't have parents to fight for them and bring them justice. How many girls have lost their lives only to become cold cases in the files of the Mozambique police? The answer might be too dark to even imagine, but in Ellie's case, although they couldn't save her life, her parents wanted to uncover the truth behind her murder.
Are you glad Paul's going over there to get some answers?
Yes, I am. I was a little concerned and worried about, I suppose, his safety, but also what information he might be able to get. We were hopeful that the Mozambique authorities would have collected all the information, interviewed people, had samples.
This couldn't be further away from the truth. Unfortunately, Paul would uncover more in 2 days than the local police did in a year.
I arrived here last night and this is the first morning, and you know, this place has really got it. It's a magical place, and I can understand why Elly would really love it here, you know.
Indeed, Mozambique is a heaven-like scenery, beautiful nature and perfect weather. But it's a pretty poor country that is still regenerating after years of terrible civil wars, and political tensions are still high. As a result of this, Paul was caught in a pretty tense situation himself as soon as he got to the country.
The embassy needs to know that you around. The embassy need to know that you are on your own investigating it, just for your own protection as well. Because Mozambique people disappear. I mean, this is a banana republic, it's a civil war country. So it takes nothing to take somebody out and dump it in the ocean.
A pretty scary thing to hear on your first day in a foreign country, right? This piece of advice, if we can call it that, might shed a light on Ellie's situation too. If this man is right, then the murderers might know there are no consequences for their crimes. Now the pieces were falling together for Paul. Not only was Ellie's death not a shock to the authorities, but they were also probably corrupt enough to cover the murder. Still, many questions remained. How did she die? Who killed her? And most importantly, why? On his second day in Tofo, Paul went over to the resort where Ellie spent her last day. This is the last photo that was taken of Ellie alive on the evening of November 8th, 2016. Sure enough, Paul found this very table his daughter had sat at hours before her death.
This seat and table here is the last photo taken of Ellie when she was alive, with a bottle of water on the table.
Trying hard to keep himself together, Paul spoke to whoever had seen Ellie during her last weeks in Mozambique. Everyone thought her death was an accident. Rumors had spread that she was intoxicated and overdosed at a toilet. But then came another twist that confirmed Paul's worst fear. This was not an overdose. As Paul put up posters of Ellie pleading for anyone to call him with any relevant information, people started appearing. Within one day, Paul received a vital clue in his investigation. It was the photo of a fisherman who'd seen Ellie's lifeless body in the early hours of November 9th. It was not a pretty picture. In fact, it was the most horrifying thing a father could see.
It's a terrible photo. It's a clear picture of Ellie lying face down in the sand, her legs apart, her underpants down around her knees, and she's got black sand all over her, on her bottom, on her arms, on her head, and on her top. It's a terrible photo.
Not only was this picture deeply distressing for Paul, it would be distressing for anyone to see, really. But it was proof that the local police were trying to cover things up. Why didn't they have this picture? Probably because this is proof of homicide.
Everybody that looks at it knows straight out that Ellie was murdered.
Paul first took this photo to the local police station in Tofo. A police officer looked at him and told him blatantly that Ellie's case is closed, as she passed out while drunk in the sand. How frustrating is this? So Paul went to the Mozambique Police headquarters and asked to speak to the chief inspector. When he showed him the photo, the chief was amazed that the police didn't have it. He then asked Paul to photocopy this picture for him, but the police station didn't have a photocopying machine.
I had to walk a kilometre up the road, got in a queue where I asked the police officer, can we please go in the front of the queue? He put me in the front of the queue, I got the copy, and then he said, you have to pay for it.
If the Mozambique Police headquarters didn't have a photocopying machine and this was the process for getting a simple copy, imagine how hard it was for the Tofo police to conduct a proper murder investigation. Still, why didn't they ask for Australia's help? Eventually, Paul asked for help from the Australian authorities. Their initial answer was they couldn't tamper with the local investigation, as they could only come to Mozambique by invitation. But an experienced homicide detective in Melbourne, Charlie Bezina, decided to take a look at the case nevertheless. As soon as he saw the photo of Ellie's body, he was certain she'd been murdered.
It's clearly a foul play murder of Ellie in some form, and ultimately there's no other conclusion he can come to.
Charlie also noted that the police report is blatantly lying if they claim Ellie could have choked on sand on her own after passing out.
So you cannot inhale sand and asphyxiate on sand because you are coughing and you're splurting. There is some other form that's either held Ellie down in some form or pushed sand in her mouth and just held her there, because you will be putting up a major fight to breathe that amount of sand into your airway.
Exactly. Who would inhale a lethal amount of sand without coughing it all out? So the police said it was an overdose, then a homicide, then that Elly passed out and inhaled too much sand after getting drunk or intoxicated with illegal substances. Finally, they declared that Elly's case is solved and it doesn't need further investigating. Why would the police cover up a murder? Isn't their whole job to bring justice and prevent crimes? It's true Mozambique is just starting to get more international tourists after the violent civil wars have ended. Admitting that people disappear or get killed in their country will surely scare other tourists off. But how is this a fair thing to do? As it turns out, Elly's father was about to uncover even more police corruption. It gets pretty dark, trust me. Throughout 2017 and 2018, Paul Warren continued to talk to witnesses and locals who came in contact with Elly in November 2016. One day he showed Elly's picture to two locals who gave him a shocking revelation.
Now, this is a photo of Elly taken by the fisherman. Very first person who got there.
This woman was simply shocked to see this photo. She was the first person to identify Elly back in 2016, and that was not the position she'd found her in.
She was like Muslim prayer.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. Like I say, I didn't go over.
So she wasn't like that?
No, she was in Muslim prayer position.
That's how she was found.
So she was repositioned.
Yep.
She was in Muslim prayer position.
She was like this.
Yeah.
This woman had found Elly after the two police officers at the crime scene got there. This could only mean one thing. The officers changed the position of Elly's body so as not to look like a murder. They tampered with the crime scene, the evidence, and a human body. All of this was done to make it look like Elly had consumed illegal substances and passed out, putting all the blame for her death on her.
So the two police officers there at the crime scene changed the crime scene to make out that Elly had gone to the toilet and fallen forward in the sand.
How could the police do this? How can we trust the police knowing that there are officers out there protecting criminals? What was the truth behind Elly's death? Who were the police protecting? After Paul showed the chief police inspector Elly's picture, the police eventually concluded that Elly's body had been moved. The sand on her body and in her lungs was a different color from the earth around the public toilets. Soon enough, rumors started spreading that Elly was indeed murdered.
My view, that's my personal view.
Yeah.
And I don't care who listens to
Yep.
my view. Elly didn't fall in her face and die.
No, I don't think so either. So you're basically saying that she struggled?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hands down.
Hands down.
That's why it was very painful.
Oh, right.
But also, it was definitely murder.
Definitely murder.
Yes, not only was Elly clearly murdered, she also struggled to fight off the perpetrator. In the clear version of the photo, you can clearly see her top being completely ripped off from her shoulder all the way down. That means that she tried to get away and someone grabbed onto her shirt very hard. Paul even reproduced Elly's top on Australian news. He wanted people to see just how hard his daughter had struggled in her last moments, urging Australian authorities to push harder and intervene in the investigation. Nicole pushed for this as well. It was clear to her that the Mozambique Police were just waiting for the attention around Elly to die down.
There's a lot of crime that goes on there that's not reported about. And so, yeah, I do think that they're trying to just hope it just goes away. With time, it'll go away and no one will ask, too many more questions.
Desperate for locals not to forget Elly, Paul built a tiny monument to his daughter around the place she died, or at least around the place her body was found.
Nicole, Elly's mother, said, I'll get some flowers for her. Some flowers here.
But by the end of 2018, it was clear to Paul that only the Australian police could get to the bottom of Elly's case. In fact, he was pretty desperate for their help.
I'm fighting, yes, and I need support from the Australian government. You think about being in my shoes for 1 minute, right? You need to do something about this.
But no matter how many pleas the Warrens would make on TV, it didn't seem like Australia was interested in taking over the investigation.
Who can get this investigation to the next level?
Well, basically, it's all about invite. The federal police have been assisting Paul and Ellie's mum in relation to this, and been open in what they can do, but it's certainly by invite. You cannot just go into another country and say, we'll do our own investigation, or can we come in as observers?
According to Charlie, the only solution is for Australia to put political pressure on Mozambique and hope for an invitation.
So to the police in Mozambique, you'd say, if you've got nothing to hide, invite some Australian investigators over and see what they can unearth.
Absolutely, for their own credibility. What are you hiding?
A lot of things, as it turns out. In 2018, it seemed like Mozambique had closed the doors on Ellie's murder forever. But in 2020, Paul would accept the help of a German private investigator and uncover an even darker truth behind the death of his daughter. When Paul Warren appeared on Sky News Australia in 2021, he had pretty interesting news for all those who cared about Ellie. In June 2020, a private investigator called Nick Greger contacted Paul asking him if he could get involved in Ellie's case. He'd seen Paul's appearance on 60 Minutes Australia and wanted to get to the bottom of the story. Nick had a history of investigating major cover-ups in Africa and the Middle East, involving criminal networks and corrupt or under-resourced police teams. So in every way, Nick was the right man for the job. He began his covert operation from his home in Germany. This was happening during the COVID-19 pandemic, and he wasn't allowed to travel to Africa at the time. First, he wanted to plant an illegal nighttime worker in the court of a local kingpin. She would befriend him and record him, hoping for a confession. He'd received a tip from a South African woman holidaying in Tofo. She'd been warned to stay away from a group of people that locals thought were responsible for Ellie's murder. It was a notorious gang known for distributing illegal substances and regular violence and robberies. So a criminal network, Nick Greger's specialty. To infiltrate the gang, he contacted African women with backgrounds involving these rings. He spoke to them via Zoom and asked them whether they would be interested in befriending a lord as a part of a covert operation and murder investigation. Although a few women volunteered, Nick only chose the woman who didn't seem scared at all. 2 weeks after taking the job, the woman infiltrated the ring and befriended the leader. Soon enough, he talked, unaware that he was being recorded.
Come with the dirtiest ghetto in Africa, where I come from. Do what you want to do, I'll show you who I am. It's like, now I can call you, now I can say, I can't say that, because I kill you.
This was the famous Tofo crime lord bragging about killing people, robbing tourists, and distributing illegal substances wherever he pleased. As soon as she received this partial confession, the infiltrated woman went back to her hometown under Nick's protection. The crime lord might not have confessed to murdering Ellie himself, but what was certain was that he and his ring robbed and killed a fair amount of tourists. So the running theory is that Ellie was first robbed by the crime lord or his gang on the night of her last party in Mozambique. When she resisted, she was violated and killed. Then they took her body to a public place where the police could frame an overdose. What better place than a public toilet, right? Sadly, if this theory is true, it just goes to show how corrupt the Mozambique police is. If the criminals knew that dumping Ellie's body would ensure a cover-up, then this is a typical procedure, and the local police protect its criminal gangs. Or perhaps it's so desperate not to lose tourists that whenever one dies, they will do whatever they can to say it wasn't murder. If the tourists got intoxicated and passed out, that's not the country's fault, is it? Imagine how infuriating it must be to learn about all these as the grieving family of Ellie. Needless to say, once he had Nick's report, Paul went to the Australian embassy in Pretoria, South Africa. There, he presented them with unavoidable facts. They couldn't still refuse to act. The Mozambique authorities would never invite Australian authorities over if they weren't pressured. But in February 2021, it finally happened. Paul received a call from the Australian Federal Police. They'd been ordered by a coroner to travel to Mozambique to investigate Ellie's death.
I'm very happy to say that the coroner now has decided to have an inquest into Ellie, which is going to be really good because that means that we're going to have witnesses called, and I am going to represent myself because I'm fully aware of all the facts in the investigation.
While the coroner can't conclude murder as the cause of death, they have the power to start a murder inquest if they believe there is enough evidence for it. Finally, it seems like Australian authorities are picking up the pace in the investigation. It's pretty frustrating to see how many walls and hurdles came between Elly's family and Elly's story. As the investigation progresses, Paul is fighting for legislation changes. He's hoping that no other families will have to go through what he went through after losing Elly. Hopefully in the future, governments will have a system in place to start an investigation right away when one of their nationals has died under suspicious circumstances overseas. Until then, all Elly's family can do is try to move past the horrific story.
What's it like for you when you come back here these days?
Oh, it's devastating, Tom. It's devastating, you know. It's just, she's such a treasure and she loved life so much, and it's just something that's just should never happen.
But how can they move on when they didn't get one bit of closure? Until the full truth behind Elly's murder is revealed, and until the crime lord and his gang are behind bars, perhaps there will never be closure for her family. Thanks for watching, you guys. What do you think about this case? Will there ever be answers? Let us know down in the comment section, and while you're at it, why not click the like button and subscribe for more. Till next time, and stay safe.